Ever wonder what happens when ordinary objects quietly absorb the fears, tragedies, and whispers of generations until they become something else entirely? Something heavier than wood or glass or porcelain. Something that feels like it's watching back. Because tonight you're not just watching a video. You're stepping through the doors of the Museum of Macabre. A place where history, as most unassuming items, have become vessels for terrifying urban legends that refuse to die. And before we go any further, welcome to True Terrifiles Official, a channel dedicated to uncovering real-world mysteries, disturbing legends, and chilling truths hidden beneath history itself. So if you're drawn to true horror rooted in reality, tap subscribe now and join a community that explores the dark corners most people avoid. Because in this museum, there are no monsters leaping from shadows, no exaggerated myths, only objects that once lived ordinary lives until something happened. Something so deeply unsettling that stories began to grow around them like rot beneath polished surfaces. And as the camera slowly pans across dimly lit display cases, silhouettes of strange shapes emerging from the darkness, remember this unsettling idea as we begin. Urban legends don't appear from nowhere. They attach themselves to something tangible, something you could touch, something that once belonged to someone just like you. And the first object waiting for us behind the glass is small, fragile, and once meant to bring comfort. Yet history remembers it for something far darker, because when innocence is twisted by fear, the result lingers far longer than anyone expects. Resting beneath a soft flickering light is an antique porcelain doll, its painted smile frozen in a way that feels just slightly wrong, its glassy eyes catching reflections as if tracking movement. And this is where the legend of what collectors later named Bleeding Betsy begins. Not as a monster, but as a child's companion in the late 19th century, passed down through generations of one family who recorded strange misfortunes in letters and journals, including claims that the doll was often found in rooms it hadn't been left in, its dress damp with unexplained stains. And while historians argue these accounts were shaped by grief and superstition during a time of high child mortality, the legend evolved as the doll changed hands, with new owners reporting unsettling dreams, unexplained noises, and an overwhelming sense of being watched whenever the doll was nearby. A pattern that fueled the urban myth that the doll absorbed emotional trauma and reflected it back into the world. And what makes this object so powerful isn't whether the stories are literally true, but why dolls occupy such a deep place in our fear responses. Because they resemble us just enough to feel alive, yet remain completely silent, unmoving witnesses to whatever happens around them. And across cultures, dolls have long been used as symbolic stand-ins for people, making them perfect anchors for legends involving attachment, loss, and guilt. And as modern paranormal forums revived the Bleeding Betsy story, in the early internet age, the doll became a template for countless modern haunted object tales, proving that once an object is labeled as cursed, belief alone can keep its legend breathing for centuries. In the next case lies a small, tarnished locket, its surface worn smooth by nervous fingers long ago. And while it looks harmless, its legend, known as the Widow's Weep, traces back to handwritten court records and mourning customs of the Victorian era, where lockets containing hair or portraits were common symbols of devotion. Yet this particular piece became infamous after multiple owners reported hearing faint sobbing when it was opened. A detail first mentioned in an 1894 newspaper column describing a grieving woman who claimed the locket would grow unusually cold near anniversaries of loss. And as the story spread, the object became associated with the idea that unresolved grief could cling to personal belongings, turning them into emotional echoes rather than supernatural threats. And what keeps this legend alive even today is how deeply it mirrors real human experiences. Because many people feel the presence of loved ones through objects left behind, making the line between memory and haunting dangerously thin. And as modern storytellers reframe the widow's weep through true crime-adjacent narratives, the locket becomes less about ghosts and more about the psychological weight objects carry when tied to tragedy, reminding us that some urban legends persist not because they terrify us, but because they feel uncomfortably familiar. Towering above the other artifacts is an ornate antique mirror, its darkened glass framed with elaborate carvings, and mirrors have inspired fear for centuries due to their unique role as both tool and symbol, reflecting reality while subtly distorting it. And the legend attached to this one, often referred to as the looking glass lament, draws from European folklore warning that mirrors could trap fragments of the self, a belief once strong enough to inspire mourning customs that involved covering mirrors after death. And according to archival accounts, this particular mirror was removed from a boarding house after multiple tenants described seeing unfamiliar expressions staring back at them. Not monsters, but altered versions of themselves. A detail that transformed the object into a symbol of identity loss rather than possession. And culturally, mirrors represent self-awareness, making them fertile ground for legends about stolen souls or alternate reflections. Because the fear isn't of something entering our world, but of something essential being quietly taken away. And as the camera lingers on the mirror's surface, the unsettling truth becomes clear. Mirrors frighten us because they force confrontation with ourselves. And urban legends simply give that fear a name. As we step back and view the Museum of Macabre as a whole, the doll, the locket, and the mirror no longer feel like isolated curiosities, but chapters in the same story about how fear, belief, and memory shape history. Because these objects didn't begin as cursed artifacts. They became legends through repetition, emotion, and the human need to explain unease. And when stories are told often enough, they imprint themselves onto the objects they describe, transforming fiction into perceived reality across generations. And this is the true power of urban legends. Not that they prove the supernatural exists, but that they reveal how deeply belief can alter perception, turning the ordinary into something unforgettable. And as the final shot lingers on the dimly lit cases, ask yourself this unsettling question before you leave. How many objects in your own life carry stories you've never questioned? And if belief alone gives legends their power, what happens the moment you start believing? Because here, at True Terror Files Official, the most disturbing truths are rarely hidden in shadows. They're sitting quietly in plain sight, waiting to be remembered.